There's a good chance that tonight you will die for your country. What if you knew that? What if you had heard that? What if you'd really experienced that? What would that night bring to you? A good chance that you will die for your country. I'm Stan Houston. This is Radio on the Edge for sure. This is the Jesus Entrepreneur Experience. And on this 4th of July evening, rather than the usual tales of heroism, and certainly those people who risked a great deal, let's take a modern story, even a story of our own times that just simply might help us to appreciate what it is we really celebrate when we celebrate freedom on the 4th of July. Greetings and welcome back to just a short little time this evening. Perhaps this will carry you even into the next day, the 5th, maybe the 6th. But you know what? It's a story tonight that you should listen to again and listen to again. It's not the usual 4th of July story, and you've already heard a lot of those, and all of them are good, all of them are wonderful, and they give a real sense of what the idea behind freedom can be. Independence Day, freedom. And those of us who are Christian entrepreneurs, that's a big word for us. First of all, Jesus came to set us free. Free from a lot of things. And then as entrepreneurs, one of the reasons we are in that particular line of work is because we believe that it will give us a greater degree of freedom. Economic freedom, career freedom, the freedom to just be what we believe God has called us to be. So freedom, that's a big deal. And because of that, we need to pay particular attention and give particular, you might say, gratification and thanksgiving for those people who have helped set us free. And in thinking about that for tonight, I just came across an article. I oftentimes like to read a little website called Quora, which means kind of like a query. And people have questions, just all kinds of questions. Many of them deal with some of the tactics of a military strategy, but there's all kinds of questions. And just this week, I came across this story here, and I'm just going to read it today because I learned something I had never known before. Now, I had known something about it because a few years ago I was talking to a man who I had just discovered had a stroke. And he was married to a woman that I had been working with in the establishment of a small little radio station. So I sat down with him and just simply said to him, "Hey, I'm Stan, and I hear you're Joe, and tell me, what's your story?" And he looked at me with a query, as most people do when I say that, kind of smiled and said, "My name is Joe. I don't have a story." To which I said, "Well, yeah, everybody has a story." And then I began, "Where'd you grow up?" The next hour and a half, the man who had no story told about growing up in the Midwest, going into World War II, becoming a B-17 on those raids over Europe, being a tail gunner on the B-17, and then coming back, going back to school in the GI Bill, becoming successful, getting a college degree, and then a long career with a major company, and then literally heading up the philanthropy department of that major organization. A significant man with a significant story. But the thing that struck me was his story of being in World War II as one of the people who was in that United States Army Air Force in Europe in the war over Europe. And then I read this. How many B-17 crews actually managed to complete 25 missions during World War II? And a gentleman named Carlo Quintillani wrote this. To put this into sobering perspective, the 8th Air Force in Europe lost more men than the entire U.S. Marine Corps did in World War II. Both horrible thoughts to consider. In the early part of the war, 1943, when the U.S. was ready to commence long-range, unescorted, deep incursion bombing, the Luftwaffe would just wait for the U.S. escorts to reach the limit of their operational range and attack in earnest when the escorts had to turn back. So the statistical chances for a USAAF heavy bomber crew in Europe to be lost on a mission were 1 in 10. 1 in 10. At a 25-mission tour of duty, statistically, once you made it to 1 in 10, you were literally on borrowed time to get to 25. Hence the festivities, and a great deal was made about the Memphis Belle when this particular B-17 crew completed and returned to base safely after their 25th mission at that phase in the conflict. As an aside, the aircraft commander of the Memphis Belle, Robert Morgan, was also a part of the first B-29 raid on Tokyo when he transferred to the PTO. Martin Kalden wrote the definitive book on the plight of the bomber crews in Black Thursday, which chronicled in great detail the second Schweinfurt bombing raid of October 14, 1943, where 60 bombers and their crews were lost. There was a similar raid that included Regensburg that cost the same. An astute reader pointed out, and I adjusted the statistical losses at Cassel later in the war of a B-24 mission at a cost of 28 of 35 bombers, as the greatest percentage of heavy bomber losses on a mission. And that same person also pointed out the worst single mission for the USAAF was 69 losses in a raid on Berlin. Wow. Statistical losses were mounting so high that the USAAF actually had to suspend daylight bombing over Germany in late 1943 until solutions could be arrived at. It was that bad. And that solution came in the form of the P-51 long-range escort that kind of evened the playing field somewhat against the Luftwaffe, but not so against flak, both being statistically equal bomber killers. After D-Day, with Luftwaffe forward bases pushed further and further back towards Germany, the attrition rate of the best and most experienced Luftwaffe pilots, no tours of duty there, they fought until they were killed or captured, increased pressure coming from the Soviets in the east, with some diversion of resources to that front by the Germans, and the increasingly overwhelming presence of the USAAF fighter escorts over the skies of Germany, tours of duty were extended to 30 missions, then 35 for the bomber crews in the last months of the war in Europe. In the last few days of the conflict, strategic bombing in Europe was halted altogether because of the lack of viable targets. Incredible. That was the story. And I remember my friend Joe who said, I always knew that when we went up on a mission, that if we got back, we knew that some of our friends would be dead. We knew that. If not us, someone else. Every night, someone died. And chances were 1 in 10. Well, of course, like Joe, almost all of those then young boys and young men are now mostly long gone. But I really was moved by that story, the realization that of all of the people we think of, obviously, the battles that were high and dry and big and mighty, and forget that it was the United States Army Air Force, 8th Air Force, that suffered more casualties than any other group. But here was the one thing that the writer put together, and I just thought it was insignificant to know. Through it all, not one mission ever turned back because of the intensity of the resistance faced. Not one ever turned back. Sometimes I think I've got it rough, and there are certainly a number of challenges in my life as an entrepreneur, and there are many challenges in your life. And we forget sometimes that even as we celebrate a nice Freedom Day, that there are people who are not celebrating freedom, and they didn't have much of a chance to celebrate freedom at all, because they were in the skies. They were taking the 1 in chance 10. They knew that they just might die that night when they went up to fight for freedom. Rod Serling from the Twilight Zone used to say, just an idea, just something for your thought and consideration. And I will add to that, just let that story sit on your head and sink to your heart. I'm Stan Houston. This is the Jesus Entrepreneur Experience. We truly are Radio on the Edge. Thank you for taking just a few minutes to hear this 4th of July story, and I hope you'll remember it. If you'd like to know more about this, why don't you write to me at radioedge77@gmail.com, radioedge77@gmail.com. We hope that you will continue to be a part of what we do at the Christian Entrepreneur Network, tcenglobal.org, tcenglobal.org. We're looking forward to your participation, being on the program yourself. We appreciate all of your contributions. tcenglobal.org/contribution. We would be grateful. Again, all the best and blessings. We'll be back next time with more stories, more ideas, perhaps some skills that you can gain so that you can truly be a Jesus entrepreneur and make your mark. Build a life, build a business, and expand your brand as a Jesus-led entrepreneur. All the best. Bye for now.